He was an academician, you know. He worked for the University of Independent University of Bangladesh, and he established one department to study tertiary level education for environment and climate change, and established one center dedicatedly for climate change. And we are very happy and proud that he was a Bangladeshi. His voice was not only for Bangladesh, it's for vulnerable of the planet. And especially we would recall that his contribution in the climate change movement to establish the loss and damage concept and the fund. Our greatest tribute and gratitude to the presidency for organizing this dedicated event for him. Thank you so much.
I thank you. I give the floor to Senegal on behalf of the least developed countries. The delegation of Senegal. The delegation of Senegal seems not to have arrived yet, so we will proceed. I will now deliver my final comments as COP President. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, Your Excellency Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, COP President-designate, let me at the outset express my sincere thanks and gratitude for the support I received from all of you in performing my duties as COP President, be it during the build-up for COP27, at the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, or throughout the year that ensued. As parties, observers, stakeholders, and civil society, as well as the UNFCCC Secretariat, your help and support was invaluable. As you all know, COP27 convened at a difficult time in the midst of a challenging international context, as the world continued to recover from the impacts of COVID-19, as well as face the compound ramifications of the war in Ukraine. Nevertheless, COP27 turned out as yet another moment where our commitment to a greater cause prevailed, a landmark in our collective progress to ensure inclusive and effective global climate action. Building on previous COPs, COP27 succeeded in delivering a number of much-needed and long-awaited elements to the global climate agenda. Together for implementation was not just a slogan at COP27, but rather a timely call to move from setting rules, frameworks, and commitments to a clear focus on the tangible implementation of these commitments on the ground. A call which we heeded together by establishing the loss and damage funding arrangements, including the fund, launching the Just Transition Work Programme, and agreeing on the Mitigation Work Programme. We showcased an unwavering commitment to enhancing global climate action during this critical decade. By voicing a resounding call for the reform of international financial institutions, highlighting renewable energy as a pathway for the future, championing the adaptation agenda through the work of the Marrakesh Partnership, and agreeing on unprecedented outcomes on water, oceans, and forests, we at COP27 ushered in a new age of implementation in our relentless fight against climate change. Colleagues, as we highlight the achievements of COP27, we also need a frank assessment of where we stand in relation to our collective ambitions, to the stark realities of science, and to the echoing voices of impacted communities across the globe. A quick realities check in this regard should be of concern to all of us for a number of reasons. First, because most of what we bring forward as tangible solutions and actionable commitments is based on speculation or well wishes at most. That we will be able to deliver our NDCs conditional and unconditional. That developed countries will deliver the 100 billion goal. That the loss and damage fund established in Sharm el-Sheikh will be replenished in billions of dollars. That international financial institutions will be reformed to deliver all the support required. And that the private sector, altogether with Article 2.1.c of the Paris Agreement, is the silver bullet that will unlock the flows of appropriate finance to developing countries. These are all mere assumptions, with no evident proof in reality. Second, rather than increasing climate finance from developed countries, actually it's decreasing in relation to the growing needs and the increasing costs of finance in developing countries. The Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund are but two examples of this worrying trend of decreased financial flows. Third, the expansion of fossil fuel exploration and production, in particular of coal, in countries that previously committed to substantially phase down or in some instances completely phase out coal. Another worrying sign is the increased gap in renewable energy expansion and availability, and the temptation of resorting to unilateral measures, either through incentives or taxes, shifting fair competition and jeopardizing multilateralism and hard-earned gains in developing nations. Colleagues, these are all worrying signs that we need to take seriously, as they not only erode trust in the global climate regime, but also have deep impacts and severe consequences on our ability to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And while the outcomes delivered in Sharm el-Sheikh do take us a step further in the right direction, these worrying signs need to be addressed immediately and effectively if we are to remain on the right side of history and to ensure that our collective efforts are not in vain. As I today perform my very last duty as COP President, and as Egypt hands over the baton of responsibility for global climate actions to the UAE, I am confident that addressing these challenges will be the focus of incoming President Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber and his able team, especially in the context of the global stocktake, as well as the energy and finance pathways of COP28. I trust that under his capable leadership, the global climate action agenda will progress even further, putting us a step closer to achieving our targets. Once again, I thank you, and I wish you all a very fruitful COP28. Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, I would like to invite you to turn to sub-item 2A of the provisional agenda for the session, entitled Election of the President of the Conference of the Parties at its 28th session. in accordance with Rule 22, Paragraph 1 of the Draft Rules of Procedure being applied, the office of the President of the Conference of the Parties is subject to rotation among the 5 regional groups. We now continue the cycle with the President from the Asia-Pacific states. It gives me great pleasure to propose that the conference elect by acclamation His Excellency Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber, who will serve as President of the conference at its 28th session. I declare His Excellency Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber elected President of the 28th session of the Conference of the Parties. I congratulate His Excellency Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber on his election and wish him every success in guiding the work of the conference. I would now like to invite His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Jaber to take his seat at the podium. Thank you, Simon, for everything.
Thank you.
All the best.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم، مساكم الله بالخير. حياكم الله في دولة الإمارات، بلاد زايد الخير والعطاء والتنمية والاستدامة. Excellencies, dear friends, colleagues, members of every delegation, it is an honor to be with you today. And I am so glad that this day has finally arrived. And as my first official act as COP President, allow me to express my gratitude to my very dear friend, Sameh Shukri. Your Excellency, you have led this conference with vision, purpose, and integrity. We are indebted to you for your service, your accomplishments, and your commitment to climate progress. And allow me to also extend my gratitude to every person in this room. We come from different nations, different backgrounds, and different generations. Yet, we share something vital: At some point in each of our lives, we all made a choice to help carry the burden of a great responsibility, to raise our hands and bear some portion of the weight on our shoulder. That choice is why we are all here in the United Arab Emirates today. The UAE is deeply proud and humbled to be hosting COP28 at a pivotal time in this critical decade for climate action. We know, as you know, the gravity of this moment. We feel, as you feel, the urgency of this work. And we see, as you see, that the world has reached a crossroads. And yes, since Paris, we have made some progress. But we also know that the road we have been on will not get us to our destination in time. The science has spoken. It has been loud and clear. It has confirmed that the moment is now to find a new road, a road wide enough for all of us, free of the obstacles and the detours of the past. That new road starts with a decision on the global stocktake, a decision that is ambitious, corrects course, and accelerates action to 2030. Through the global stocktake, we have a chance to unite the three core elements of the climate agenda. We can finally bring mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation, which includes finance, under one umbrella, united around higher ambition, giving clear direction on nationally determined contributions, and connecting everything we agree here to practical action in the real world. Every nation, every sector, and every one of us has an urgent and an immediate role to play. For my part, I pledge that I will run an inclusive and transparent process, one that encourages free and open discussion between all parties. I ask you to start this COP with a different mindset. I ask you to adopt a different way of thinking. And I ask you to be flexible. We must ensure that this COP delivers the most ambitious global stocktake possible. So let's work efficiently. Let's agree on the agenda and move to text quickly. Please. We have no time to waste. Friends, I believe that the United Arab Emirates reflects the spirit we need at this COP. My country is only 2 years older than me. And that makes it a young country, in fact, a very young country. It is a nation that rose up from the desert through the vision and foresight of our late founding father, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, and the conviction and aspiration he passed on to the generations that followed. And now, 52 years later, Just look around. We may be a young nation, but we have big ambitions and hold fast to principles like collaboration, optimism, true partnership, determination, and commitment. These are the ingredients that make up the DNA of the United Arab Emirates. And it's these core values of trust, purpose, partnership, and pragmatism that I believe must define the DNA of COP28. That means it is essential that no issue is left off the table. And yes, as I have been saying, we must look for ways and ensure the inclusion of the role of fossil fuels. I know there are strong views about the idea of including language on fossil fuels and renewables in the negotiated text. We collectively have the power to do something unprecedented. In fact, we have no choice but to go the very unconventional way. I ask you all to work together. Be flexible. Find common ground. Come forward with solutions and achieve consensus. And never lose sight of our North Star of 1.5. Because that is what I am going to stay laser focused on. Excellencies, dear friends, we all know that a key success factor across climate agenda is finance. And for too long, finance has not been available, accessible, or affordable. This presidency is committed to unlocking finance to ensure that the Global South does not have to choose between development and climate action. Let this be the year that climate finance meets the magnitude of the moment. Let this be the COP where we deliver on our promises from the 100 billion to loss and damage. And on loss and damage, I know how important this issue is to the parties, particularly to the most vulnerable. What began in Sharm el-Sheikh and what was given critical momentum and traction in Abu Dhabi earlier this month must now be delivered and actioned here in Dubai. And allow me here to pause for a moment to honor the memory of our distinguished colleague and my dear friend, Salim al-Haq. He devoted his entire career to the cause of finding a way to address loss and damage. And I personally benefited from his advice and his experience, particularly on the imperative to shift the world's focus to the needs of adaptation. Excellencies, adaptation must be at the heart of our action. We must bridge the finance gap and agree on a robust framework for the global goal. Let's put nature, lives, and livelihoods at the core of our national plans. Let's finally face the issues that are critical to adaptation, like water, food, agriculture, and health. And that is why I am proud that this COP will be the first to host a climate health ministerial. Colleagues, I want this COP to be the COP that maximizes momentum on mitigation. Today, countries representing more than 85% of the world's economy are behind COP28's goal of tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030. And we are reaching critical mass on the goal to double energy efficiency by 2030. This is how we will transition away from unabated coal. Let me also encourage countries to establish net zero methane emission targets as part of their next round of NDCs. Zeroing out methane emissions can make a huge impact in the shortest time frame. Colleagues, and let history reflect the fact that this is the presidency that made a bold choice to proactively engage with oil and gas companies. We had many hard discussions. Let me tell you, that wasn't easy. But today, many of these companies are committing to zero methane emissions by 2030 for the first time. And now, many national oil companies have adopted net zero 2050 targets for the first time. And I'm grateful that they have stepped up to join this game-changing journey. But I must say, it is not enough. And I know that they can do much more. They can lead the way. And them leading the way will ensure that others follow and catch up. At the same time, as part of this presidency's action agenda, we are engaging with other high-emitting sectors like heavy transportation, aluminum, steel, and cement, all in an effort to accelerate decarbonization at scale. I'm calling on all industries to engage, to innovate, to modernize, and invest in clean technologies. Colleagues, my friends, my partners, the next 2 weeks will not be easy. Let's remember, our task is not only about negotiating text or putting words on paper. It is about improving lives. It is about people. From the students I met in Bangladesh to the young entrepreneurs I saw in Nairobi, to indigenous communities I visited in the Amazon basin. All of us want and need the same things: clean air, clean water, healthy food, economies, and opportunities for ourselves and our families. And of course, we want a safe and a secure future. Is that too much to ask? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my friends, and my partners, we all made a choice to be here at this time. We understand the gravity of the situation, and I know that we all respect the science. Today, we need to follow through. Take that new road, and let's bring everyone on board with us. If we want to accelerate progress across the climate agenda, we must apply a positive can-do vision to get a GST decision with the highest ambition. We must translate the negotiated outcomes into real results in the real world. And we must use the next 2 weeks wisely. Take a no-nonsense approach with no delays. Let's restore faith in multilateralism. Let's bring back the lost trust in multilateralism. And let's deliver some good news to the world that really needs it today. And friends, I'll be right there, at your side, every step of the way. I will roll up my own sleeves alongside you. Let's rise above our differences to make the difference for future generations. Right now, here in the United Arab Emirates, I'm calling you all to unite, to act, and to deliver. I thank you. Distinguished delegates, honored guests, colleagues, we are pleased to have with us Professor Jem Skia, the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and Mr. Simon Steele, the UNFCCC Executive Secretary. It is my pleasure to invite Mr. Simon Steele to address the plenary. Simon, you have the floor.
Excellencies, delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me first thank our Egyptian friends for their stewardship over this last year as they hand over this heavy responsibility to our Emirati colleagues. And let us be clear, this is a heavy responsibility. Colleagues, this process reminds me of watching my baby son, Joe, crawling across the sharp grasses of my parents' island home. He was an accomplished crawler and runner, but he barely spent any time on the baby steps in between. Today, we find ourselves in a rather different position in humanity's climate action journey. We are taking baby steps, stepping far too slowly from an unstable world that lacks resilience to working out the best responses to the complex impacts that we are facing. We must teach climate action to run, because this has been the hottest year ever in humanity. So many terrible records were broken, and we are paying the price with people's lives and livelihoods. We're standing at a precipice, facing the global stocktake, and we've got two options. Either we can note the lack of progress, tweaking our current best practices, and encourage ourselves to do more at some other point in time. Or we decide at what point we'll have made everyone on the planet safe and resilient. We decide to fund this transition properly, including the response to loss and damage. And we decide to commit to a new energy system. If we do not signal the terminal decline of the fossil fuel era as we know it, we welcome our own terminal decline, and we choose to pay with people's lives. If this transition isn't just, we won't transition at all. And that means justice within and between countries, sharing benefits across society, ensuring that everyone, women, indigenous peoples, and youth, in all their diversity, have equal opportunities to benefit from these transitions. Last year, I said we were going to do things differently. So let me lay out that vision and what's going to happen over the next 2 years. In 2024, countries will submit their first biennial transparency report. This will mean the reality of individual progress can't be concealed. We will also see at COP29 how to finance this massive shift with the new finance goal. And let this be your first official notice that early in 2025, countries must deliver new nationally determined contributions. Please start working on them now. This takes us to COP30, where every single commitment on finance, adaptation, and mitigation has to be in line with a 1.5-degree world. Science tells us we have around 6 years before we exhaust the planet's ability to cope with our emissions, before we blow through 1.5-degree limits. As a teenager, my son Joe had a wonderful phrase he would use when I asked him to do something. "I'm trying to try, Dad," he would say. Unfortunately, this does as much for delivering climate action as it does finishing your homework. It's simply not enough for us to be trying to try. And I'm not using my son as an example to suggest that it's his generation's responsibility to save us from the scourge we face. We are indebted to young people and to civil society for having pushed us this far. They're looking at us to take responsibility for speeding things up. So let's be transparent in the actions and the decisions that we take here with each other. And in that spirit, delivering on the promise I made on accountability, the UNFCCC has reformed the badging system. Every participant at this COP is already publicly listed. The whole world knows who's here. They will hold us to account on what we do or do not do. As Yoda would say, do or do not. There is no try. Yes, this is the biggest COP yet, but attending a COP does not tick the climate box for the year. The badges around your necks make you responsible for delivering climate action here and at home. To further ensure accountability, I'm committing the UNFCCC to tracking all announcements made and initiatives launched, so that long after the cameras have gone, we can ensure our promises continue to serve the planet. Dear delegates, the UNFCCC, as custodians of this process, is here as the impartial facilitator. Remember this: behind every line you work on, every word or comma you wrestle with here at COP, there is a human being, a family, a community that depends on you. Turn the badges around your necks into a badge of honor and a life jacket for the millions of people you are working for. Accelerate climate action. Teach it to run. I thank you. Shukran.
Thank you, Simon. I welcome Professor Jamskia and congratulate him on his election as the new chair of the IPCC. Professor Skia comes with extensive experience and expertise on climate science and will be leading the IPCC through its 7th assessment cycle. I invite Professor Skia to address the plenary. Professor Skia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honoured to address the opening of COP28 on behalf of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and we are thankful to the UEA government and the UNFCCC for their careful preparation of the conference and for their generous hospitality. IPCC's scientific assessments are ever clearer and more certain about climate change, its impacts and future risks, and options for adaptation and mitigation. Our planet has warmed by more than 1 degree Celsius since the pre-industrial era as the result of burning fossil fuels, deforestation, and the unsustainable use of resources. Human activity has led to changes in the Earth's climate of a magnitude that are unprecedented over centuries and thousands of years. Climate impacts, some of them irreversible, are widespread, rapid and intensifying, from the poles to the tropics and from the mountains to the oceans. And without immediate and deep emission reductions across all sectors, we will not meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. The UNEP GAP report released a few days ago shows that we are headed towards global warming of 3 degrees Celsius if we carry on with our current policies. And let us not forget the gap in terms of adaptation and financing. But there are some promising signs of climate action. In some countries, there have been sustained emissions reductions, and these have helped to bend the rising trend in emissions globally. And in the past decade, there have been sustained decreases in the costs of renewable energy. Our assessments have identified multiple options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change. And these can be implemented right now, but they need to be scaled up and mainstreamed through policies and increased financing. Now, the IPCC is gearing up for its 7th assessment cycle, and in less than 2 months, our 195 member governments will take decisions on the programme of work for the rest of this decade of climate action. Our aspiration is to make effective use of the best available science to deliver focused, policy-relevant reports, and to do so in an inclusive fashion that represents all perspectives. As the chair of the IPCC, I can reassure you that the scientific community is poised, using the resources available to it, to support the outcomes of COP28 in shaping climate action based on science. But finally, let us recall, science by itself is no substitute for action. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Skia. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of the opening ceremony of COP28. Delegates, please remain in your seats. We will continue with the first plenary meeting of COP28, followed by the first plenary meeting of CMP18 and the first plenary meeting of CMA5. Distinguished delegates, I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2B of the Supplementary Provisional Agenda, Adoption of the Rules of Procedure. The draft rules are contained in document FCCC/CP/1996/2. Parties may recall that the draft rules of procedure are being applied with the exception of Rule 42 due to lack of consensus. At COP27, the Presidency held consultations and reported that there continued to be no consensus on the matter and proposed that consultations continue at COP28. I therefore propose that we continue to apply the draft rules of procedure with the exception of Rule 42. I propose that Mr. Ahmed Al-Ghardaqa, a senior member of my delegation, holds informal consultations on this issue. I will report on the outcome of those consultations at the closing plenary meeting. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2C of the Supplementary Provisional Agenda, Adoption of the Agenda. I would like to express my deep appreciation to all parties for their flexibility, support, and commitment to reaching agreement on the adoption of the agendas and launch of work swiftly and smoothly, and to deliver a successful and ambitious outcome of this conference. Together with the COP27 presidency and the chairs of the subsidiary bodies, we held a series of consultations and bilateral meetings with negotiating groups and parties on the adoption of the agendas of the governing and subsidiary bodies. On Monday, 27 and Wednesday, 29th of November, we also convened heads of delegation meetings on the adoption of the agendas. Throughout these consultations, parties expressed a range of views and a common desire to initiate proceedings swiftly. and smoothly, given the scale and importance of mandates and deliverables expected here. The items proposed by parties to be included in the agendas reflect genuine concerns of parties and were proposed in a constructive spirit. They are all important issues, and my team and I took great care to ensure that all views were heard. Further to the consultations and heads of delegation meetings, please allow me to outline the understandings reached regarding the adoption of the agendas of the COP28, CMP 18, CMA 5, SBSTA 59, and SBI 59. I propose that the governing and the subsidiary bodies adopt their agendas presented in their respective supplementary agendas without the inclusion of any of the items proposed by parties, as well as Agenda Item 10H of the CMA Supplementary Provisional Agenda entitled Sharm el-Sheikh Dialogue in the scope of Article 2, Paragraph 1C of the Paris Agreement and its complementarity with Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. This proposal is on the understanding that parties will still be able to consider the underlying issues and concerns related to those agenda items, either under other agenda items in line with their existing mandates or under consultations to be held by the Presidency. I further propose that the underlying issues and concerns in relation to the following proposed items can be discussed in the context of ongoing discussions under the mandated agenda items, including regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agenda of the COP entitled Mountains and Climate Change, highlighting the need for the protection of vulnerable mountain ecosystems while building the resilience of mountain peoples and economies to reduce loss and damage. These issues can be considered in discussions under the 16th meeting of the Nairobi Work Programme Focal Point Forum on Understanding and Closing Adaptation Knowledge Gaps in Mountains, High Latitude Areas and the Chrysosphere, as well as future activities of the Nairobi Work Programme. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agendas of the CMA and subsidiary bodies entitled Urgently Scaling Up Financial Support from Developed Country Parties in line with Article 4, Paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement to enable implementation of developing countries. These issues can be considered in the discussions under CMA Agenda Item 10A, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agenda of the CMA entitled Doubling Adaptation Finance as part of the efforts towards the implementation of decisions of 1/CP.26, paragraph 11, and 1/CMA.3, paragraph 18 on adaptation finance. These issues can be considered in discussions under CMA Agenda Item 10A, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agendas of the COP, CMA, and the subsidiary bodies entitled Operationalization of the Principles of Equity and Common but Differentiated Responsibilities and Respective Capabilities in accordance with Article 2, Paragraph 2 of the Paris Agreement. These issues can be considered in the discussions under CMA Agenda Item 4, SBSTA Agenda Item 5, and SBI Agenda Item 8 on the global stocktake. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agendas of the COP, CMA, and the subsidiary bodies entitled Mission 1.5, Positive Incentives for Accelerating Early Actions and Policies that are Nationally Determined. These issues can be considered in the discussions under CMA on Agenda Item 4, SBSTA Agenda Item 5, and SBI Agenda Item 8 on the global stocktake. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agendas of the COP, CMP, CMA, and the subsidiary bodies entitled Concerns with unilateral trade measures related to climate change and their potential adverse impact on equitable and just transitions in the context of sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty. These issues can be considered in the discussions under CMA Agenda Item 4, SB, STA Agenda Item 5, and SBI Agenda Item 8 on the global stocktake. And regarding the sub-item 10H of the supplementary provisional agenda of the CMA entitled Sharm el-Sheikh Dialogue on the Scope of Article 2, Paragraph 1C of the Paris Agreement and its complementarity with Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, the report on the dialogue be considered in the discussions under CMA Agenda Item 10A, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. I also propose the following way forward regarding the matters listed below. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agenda for the CMA entitled The Special Needs and Special Circumstances of Africa, I propose to convene consultations on this matter following the practice taken at previous conferences. The outcome of these consultations and any other issues raised during the consultations will be reported back under the agenda item Other Matters. On the sub-item on the supplementary provisional agenda of the CMA entitled 7th Review of the Financial Mechanism, I propose to hold consultations on a way forward on this matter. The outcome of these consultations and any other issues raised during the consultations will be reported back to the CMA later in the session. On the item on the supplementary provisional agenda of the CMP entitled Issues Related to Article 3, Paragraph 9 and Article 21 of the Kyoto Protocol, I propose to hold consultations on a way forward on this matter. The outcome of these consultations and any other issues raised during the consultations will be reported back to the CMP later in the session. The above understandings are not intended to exclude consideration of any of the underlying issues and concerns raised by parties in any other discussions under the agendas, but merely to ensure that our work can proceed in an expeditious manner and avoiding duplication. The above understandings will be recalled when we adopt the agendas of the CMP and CMA. The above understandings will be reflected in the reports of the sessions of the governing bodies. The understandings will apply mutatis mutandis to the related issues on the supplementary provisional agendas of the subsidiary bodies and will be recalled by the chairs of the subsidiary bodies prior to the adoption of the respective agendas and reflected in the reports of the sessions. Further, I propose that the following agenda item be held in abeyance. COP item 14. Consideration of proposals from parties and amendments to convention under Article 15. Sub-item A. Proposal from the Russian Federation to amend Article 4, Paragraph 2F of the Convention. And sub-item B. Proposal from Papua New Guinea and Mexico to amend Article 7 and 18 of the Convention. COP item 15. Second review of the adequacy of Article 4, Paragraph 2A-B of the Convention. Dear delegates, with these understandings and the proposal just outlined, and with immense gratitude for the flexibility shown by all parties to allow our important work to begin forthwith, I invite parties to turn to documents FCCP/CP/2023/1 and Addenda 1 and 2. I propose to adopt the supplementary provisional agenda contained in document FCCP/CP/2023/ADD.2, amended to reflect these understandings with the following items deleted: Item 18, Item 19, Item 20, and Item 21. I hear no objections I see Kyrgyzstan have asked for the floor. Please.
Honorable Chairperson, distinguished delegates, esteemed hosts from the United Arab Emirates, I extend heartfelt greetings on behalf of the Kyrgyz Republic to everyone gathered here for the 28th conference of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We commend the United Arab Emirates for their exceptional preparation and leadership, setting a stage that inspires progress and unity. As we convene at this crucial juncture, the gaze of the world is fixed upon us. Full with anxiety and expectations, the challenges we face are not only unparalleled, but also threaten the very fate of our survival as a species. The responsibility to act and to act decisively has never been more pressing. The Kyrgyz Republic is committed to contributing constructively to this conference and working constructively with the Presidency and all fellow national delegations. Our focus aligns with the broader global agenda, yet we bring to the table a perspective shaped by our unique geographical and environmental circumstances. In this spirit, we propose the inauguration of a new dialogue on mountain and climate to focus on the pivotal role of mountainous regions in the global climate system. This initiative is not just vital for over 1 billion people residing in these landscapes across more than 100 nations, but is essential for the planet as a whole. The health of our mountain communities is inextricably linked to the health of our global climate. As we advance through the sessions of this conference, the Kyrgyz delegation will actively seek support for this mountain climate dialogue. Our goal is not only to bring attention to this critical issue, but to foster actionable strategies and collaboration. In this regard, our country has been a consistent advocate of the agenda for integrating mountain issues into international negotiations at all levels for more than 20 years. We are grateful to all partners for their support of the initiative of the Kyrgyz Republic to adopt the resolution Sustainable Mountain Development at the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly, within the framework of which 2023-2027 was declared the 5 years of action for the development of mountain regions. In implementation of this initiative, we look forward to the support of not only mountainous countries, but also of all other countries in the implementation of the adopted Global Action Plan under this resolution of the UN General Assembly, since mountains are water towers that provide water to around 2 billion people. Kyrgyzstan, understanding the importance of collective action, unites countries in the group of Friends of Mountain Countries and has also joined the group of Friends of Cryosphere and the Forum of Climate Vulnerable Countries, a platform that brings together countries that are most vulnerable to climate change and produce the least emissions. We call on the international community to support the efforts of mountain countries aimed at solving the climate and environmental problems of mountain ecosystems. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyrgyzstan, for your kind words and your initiative. I see that Bhutan has requested the floor. Bhutan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, Bhutan would like to thank the COP presidency for the warm hospitality and impressive arrangements and hard work in bringing us all together to this beautiful city of Dubai. Mr. President, Bhutan strongly supports the intervention made by Kyrgyzstan on an urgent call for dialogue on mountain and climate change to be launched here at COP28. Bhutan reiterates our submissions and requests made during numerous similar consultations in previous COPs on the issue of mountain ecosystem and its inclusion in the process. There is more than adequate scientific evidence proving that fragile mountain ecosystems are extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. We are already witnessing irreversible damage due to the changing climate in the Himalayan mountain ecosystems and live in constant fear. In fact, during pre-COP last month, in Bhutan, there was a displacement of an iceberg causing a glacial lake outburst, knocking the side of the lake wall and releasing about 2 million cubic meters of water to rush down the valley. The IPCC report confirms that the rate of ice sheet loss increased by a factor of 4 in the last 3 decades. The unprecedented pace of glacier retreat at the global scale is more alarming in the Himalayas. Even if global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1/3 of the glaciers in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region will disappear by the year 2100. And as you all know, this is the best case scenario where the world manages to limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The high-impact climate events are stressing vulnerable sectors such as agriculture, energy, biodiversity, forests, food security, infrastructure, public health, and development. The livelihoods of our people are at stake. The impacts of melting glaciers are not only limited to the mountainous regions, but to downstream regions. Rapid ice sheet melt could lead to catastrophic sea level rise even before the end of the century. The IPCC report confirmed that combined ice sheet and glacier mass loss contributed to 42% of this global mean sea level rise from 2006 to 2018. This will result in the extinction of small islands and mountain habitats. Mr. President, colleagues, I wish to emphasize that we contribute the least to climate change, but ironically hit the hardest with its impacts. The world has witnessed our leadership on the environmental fronts. For instance, Bhutan has communicated an ambitious revised NDC and reaffirmed to remain carbon neutral despite the development challenges we face. And therefore, our ask for this is only reasonable. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Bhutan. I see that Guatemala has requested the floor. Guatemala, you have the floor.
Guatemala tiene el honor de hacer esta intervención en nombre de los países de AILAC, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Honduras, Panamá, Paraguay y Perú. Nuestra intervención se encuentra alineada con los mensajes brindados por el representante de Cuba en nombre de los países del Grupo G77 y China. Agradecemos al Gobierno de Emiratos Árabes Unidos por darnos la bienvenida en esta hermosa ciudad de Dubái y por el trabajo que la presidencia entrante de la COP28 ha llevado a cabo a lo largo de este año. Distinguidas delegaciones, tal y como lo demuestra el 6º informe de evaluación del IPCC, algunas consecuencias de los fenómenos extremos del calentamiento global son irreversibles. Con relación a los temas de adaptación, la expectativa general de AILAC para el CLAS es que contribuya sustancialmente a mejorar la acción y el apoyo a la adaptación basados en la mejor ciencia disponible, evitando y reduciendo futuras necesidades de adaptación y costos, especialmente cuando en algunos casos estamos superando los límites de la adaptación. AILAC trabajará por un marco conjunto que contenga objetivos ambiciosos, metas e indicadores para el GGA a través de un enfoque estructurado bajo el programa de trabajo Glasgow Sharm el Sheikh y contribuir al balance mundial. Respecto a la red de Santiago, AILAC apoya el borrador de texto preparado en la sesión 58 de los órganos subsidiarios como base para las negociaciones. Reiteramos la importancia que la Secretaría de la Red debería ser independiente, tener una amplia presencia regional y nacional a través de la sede y las oficinas de país para brindar de manera equilibrada la asistencia técnica y asegurar que el anfitrión cubra todo el espectro de pérdidas y daños para todos. Sobre el Fondo de Pérdidas y Daños, si bien el resultado del TC5 está lejos de ser perfecto, AILAC considera que el paquete final acordado es el fundamento para salvaguardar el acceso del fondo a los recursos y su operacionalización de manera efectiva. Abogamos por la adopción de las recomendaciones del TC5 sin enmiendas. AILAC destaca la importancia del balance mundial como un resultado fundamental de esta COP. El informe del Grupo de Trabajo Especial sobre la Acción Climática subraya la urgencia de abordar el cambio climático, reconociendo que este podría ser el último informe antes de superar el umbral crítico de los 1.5 grados centígrados. Con especial énfasis en la estrecha ventana de tiempo para aumentar la ambición y la implementación, así como evaluar desafíos y oportunidades del Acuerdo de París, con el fin de proporcionar resultados sustanciales y conclusiones claras para las partes y actores no estatales. AILAC aboga por que se consideren íntegramente los informes de síntesis del diálogo técnico, tratando de no reabrir sus conclusiones y concentrándose en los futuros pasos para la consecución de resultados. Es fundamental que el balance mundial, como base para las transformaciones a futuro y en consecuencia con el ciclo de ambición, incluya una guía en acciones y procesos que acompañen la corrección del curso que debemos implementar basados en la ciencia. Subrayamos la importancia de considerar el impacto intergeneracional de las decisiones sobre el cambio climático y se insta a reafirmar compromisos financieros existentes, así como establecer nuevos objetivos ambiciosos. Sobre la nueva meta colectiva cuantificada, AILAC reconoce las mejoras significativas en los diálogos de este año, donde centrarse en opciones tangibles ha demostrado ser valioso para delinear diversas alternativas dentro de cada dimensión crítica de la meta. Esperamos una decisión con avances tanto en el fondo como en el proceso. Asimismo, queremos destacar la importancia de seguir compartiendo nuestras diferentes opiniones sobre el artículo 2.1c, destacando su complementariedad con el artículo 9, el cual, al ser uno de los objetivos a largo plazo del Acuerdo de París, puede actuar como facilitador y ampliador de los esfuerzos para hacer la realidad el artículo 2.1a y 2.1e. Su puesta en práctica debería reflejar la interconexión de los flujos financieros con la ambición general del acuerdo respecto a mantener el aumento de la temperatura por debajo de 1.5 grados centígrados y generar resiliencia. El desarrollo y transferencia de tecnología son fundamentales, requiriendo capacidades endógenas en países en desarrollo para un despliegue exitoso. Es esencial el apoyo para superar la falta de financiación y la implementación de resultados tecnológicos. AILAC quiere recordar que los enfoques cooperativos incluidos en el artículo 6 del Acuerdo de París todavía requiere decisiones críticas para finalizar la arquitectura completa para la implementación rápida de estos mecanismos, a la vez que aseguren la transparencia y la integralidad ambiental.
Thank you, Guatemala. I appreciate and very much value your contributions. Allow me, though, just to say that, colleagues, we will have the opportunity to make our national statements later during this session. And I see no more requests, and I hear no objections. Let us now proceed to adopting the agenda, and in fact, let's get to work immediately. It is so decided. Distinguished delegates, regarding the agenda items for which informal consultations by the Presidency are required, I wish to inform that I will appoint senior delegates to lead these consultations on my behalf, and I will keep parties informed on the progress of the consultations. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, allow me once again to express our appreciation to everyone who contributed to the smooth and rapid adoption of the agenda. Our success in launching our work without delay sends an important message of commitment, dedication, and determination to commence our important and urgent work on all items on our agenda. All parties contributed to forging this consensus around the agenda through their flexible and constructive engagement. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2D of the agenda, election of officers other than the President. Mohammed Nasr from Egypt has begun consultations on the election of officers to bodies under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. I thank Ambassador Nasr for the work undertaken so far, and I propose that he continues the consultations to finalize the nominations. In accordance with established practice, confirmed nominees to the Bureau will be invited to attend meetings of the Bureau as observers until the elections have taken place. Parties will note that women currently comprise 38% of the membership of Convention, Kyoto Protocol, and Paris Agreement bodies. I urge parties to nominate men and women with a view to achieving the goal of gender balance. In light of the high number of outstanding nominations for a large number of officers under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement, including for many constituted bodies entrusted with important technical work, I urge parties to intensify efforts to transmit the remaining nominations by the deadline of 8 p.m. GST on Saturday, December 9th. I propose to return to this item at the closing plenary of the COP. I hear no objections, and it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2E of the agenda, admission of organizations as observers. The conference has before it document FCCP/2023/3, which includes a list of IGOs and NGOs that have expressed a wish to participate in the UNFCCC process as observers, and a list of already admitted organizations that legally changed their names due to mergers with other organizations eligible for admission. These lists were the basis on which organizations were informed of their provisional admittance status to COP28, on the understanding that the final authority to grant admission lies with the COP. In accordance with the recommendations of the Bureau on this matter, I invite the COP to admit as observers the organizations listed in document FCCP/CP/2023/3. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, I acknowledge that there is no request. I once again invite the COP to admit as observers the organizations listed in document FCCP/CP/2023/3, and hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item. I see Russia requesting the floor. Russia, the floor is yours.
Господин председатель, Российская Федерация хотела бы сделать заявление по пункту 2и повестки дня заседания. Обращаем внимание на предоставление статуса наблюдателя при Конвенции двум якобы независимым организациям, которые в действительности управляются и финансируются правительством США. Речь идет о Национальном демократическом институте и об учрежденном Джорджем Соросом фонде «Открытое общество». Широко известно, что в их послужной список входит вмешательство во внутренние дела суверенных государств, организация общественных волнений и протестов. Считаем, что включение этих так называемых независимых НПО в состав наблюдателей направлено на политизацию климатического процесса и чревато нанесением ущерба рабочим переговорам в рамках Конвенции. Кроме того, в очередной раз отмечаем перепредставленность организаций только из определенной группы государств. Рассчитываем, что в будущем вопросу отбора наблюдателей будет уделяться больше внимания. Просим внести данное заявление в протокол заседания. Благодарю вас.
Thank you, Russia, for your statement. We will note your statement and the record. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2F of the agenda, organization of work, including for the sessions of the subsidiary bodies. Today, the governing and subsidiary bodies will convene their opening plenaries and launch work under all agenda items. Upon completion of the opening plenaries of the SBSTA and SBI, the 5 bodies will reconvene in a joint plenary to hear statements from groups and observer organizations. I see that the US have requested the floor. The US, you have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you. First of all, congratulations, and thank you for your very powerful opening comments. Let me just say very quickly, I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but the United States would like to underscore the importance of ensuring access by civil society to COP28. And we're very convinced that the meaningful participation of climate activists, human rights defenders, and other members of civil society is an indispensable element for success of this conference. So in this respect, we're very concerned about the assertion that NGOs that clearly meet the UNFCCC criteria for admission as observers should somehow not be accredited, not be permitted to be here for obviously other reasons. As the Secretariat has found, both the NGOs referenced in the previous intervention meet the criteria for the admission as observers, and there is no question that these NGOs are qualified in the matters of UN climate change regime. There is no basis for any party to question the basis for either of these 2 organizations' participation in our process. And if the complaining party's intervention is going to be reflected in the report of this session, the United States would request that this response also be reflected in the report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, United States, for your statement. We will note your statement and the record. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2F of the agenda, organization of work, including for the sessions of the subsidiary bodies. Today, the governing and subsidiary bodies will convene their opening plenaries and launch work under all agenda items. Upon completion of the opening plenaries of the SBSTA and SBI, the 5 bodies will reconvene in a joint plenary to hear statements from groups and observer organizations. Dear colleagues, let me outline how I would like to organize work under the COP. On the following items, which are also on the agendas of the relevant subsidiary bodies, the COP will take appropriate action on the basis of recommendations from the subsidiary bodies. Please note that the full titles of the agenda items I will now list are projected on the screen. Agenda items 4, 5, and 6. 7, as it relates to report of the WIM Executive Committee. Sub-item 8B, as it relates to the second review of the functions of the Standing Committee on Finance. Agenda items 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, including the report on gender composition and the synthesis report on progress in integrating a gender perspective into constituted body processes, and sub-item 16A. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Colleagues, on Wednesday, December 6th, the SPSTA and the SPI will conclude their work. I look forward to receiving the outcome of the work of the SPSTA under the leadership of Harry and of the SPI under the leadership of Nabil. After the closure of the SPSTA and the SPI, I will convene a plenary meeting to propose the modalities of work for the second week of the conference. Dear colleagues, tomorrow, Friday 1, December 1st, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the United Arab Emirates, will have the distinct honor of welcoming heads of states and government from more than 170 countries to the World Climate Action Summit. The first part of the high-level segment will also take place tomorrow, Friday, December 1st, and will continue on to Saturday, December 2nd, during which heads of state and government will deliver their national statements or statements on behalf of UNFCCC negotiating groups. The high-level segment will resume on Saturday 9th and Sunday 10th of December. During the second week of the conference, we will reconvene the COP to consider decisions and conclusions for adoption. Hearing no objections, we will proceed on this basis. Let's turn to an issue regarding the youth. A priority for the United Arab Emirates for every element of this COP has been inclusion, especially inclusion of those who are most vulnerable and most impacted by the impacts of climate change, such as women, indigenous peoples, children, and youth. The UAE COP28 Youth Climate Champion, Her Excellency Shamma Al-Mazrou'i, has worked to build opportunities for youth to engage with the UNFCCC processes, strong inclusion of youth who are set to inherit the long-term impacts of climate change is a must, and we hope parties will discuss how this can be developed at this COP. I propose to hold consultations on a way forward on this important issue. I will appoint a senior member of my delegation to lead consultations on this issue. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2G, dates and venues of future sessions. In accordance with the principle of rotation among regional groups, the President of COP29 would come from the Eastern European states, and for COP30 from the Latin American and Caribbean states. The Latin American and Caribbean states have nominated Brazil to host COP30. I encourage the Eastern European states to accelerate and finalize their consultations on this matter to ensure timely decision. I propose that Hannah Al-Hashimi, a senior member of my delegation, conduct consultations on my behalf with a view to proposing a draft decision on this matter for adoption by the COP. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to Agenda Item 7, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts. The COP is invited to consider the matter of its authority over and guidance to the WIM, including its Executive Committee. I propose a senior member of my delegation to undertake consultations on this matter. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to Agenda Item 8, matters relating to finance, including sub-items A to G. For sub-item 8A, the COP is invited to continue discussions on long-term finance. It is also invited to consider the summary of the deliberations at the 5th High-Level Ministerial Dialogue on Climate Finance on the progress and fulfillment of the goal of mobilizing jointly the $100 billion per year by 2020, convened at COP27, and to take any action it deems appropriate. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Carlos Fuller from Belize and Gard Lindes from Norway for consideration of matters under this subcommittee, under this sub-item. I would like now to invite the representatives of Germany and Canada to report on the progress and fulfillment of the goal mobilizing jointly the $100 billion per year by 2020. Germany, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, COP President, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. As we all know, climate finance is a key part of our collective strategy to address climate change, and now more than ever, delivering support is essential to responding growing needs of developing countries. These efforts include meeting the $100 billion mark urgently and continuing to improve the quality and the effectiveness of climate finance. I am here to briefly report back on the work that my colleague, Minister Stephen Guilbeault of Canada, and I have conducted over the past months and years on the progress made to deliver on the $100 billion climate finance goal. On November 16th, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development published a report showing that in 2021, climate finance contributors collectively provided and mobilized $89.6 billion in climate finance. This is an important increase from 2020 and exceeds projections made by the OECD in the context of the Climate Finance Delivery Plan led by Canada and Germany. We were pleased to see the OECD Secretary General indicating that based on preliminary data for 2022, there is a likelihood that the goal was already met in 2022 and certainly was met in 2023. This is further underpinned by the good increase of the report Climate Finance by MDBs in 2022. I hand it over now to my Canadian colleague. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Germany. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Envoy Morgan. This is the third year that Germany and Canada have been working together with contributors on the U.S. $100 billion goal and listening to recipients and civil society about the impact of the financing provided. Meeting the $100 billion mark is an important step forward, but it is clear that we cannot stop here. We understand that the U.S. $100 billion is not enough to meet the needs of developing countries. Meeting the $100 billion mark I would like in particular to highlight the positive trend noted in the OECD report regarding the increase in funding for LDCs and SIDS. However, supporting and amplifying ambitious climate action in the developing world will require much more in the future. The new goal is an opportunity to support developing countries in meeting needs outlined in Article 2.1 of the Paris Agreement. We look forward to working with all of you on the NCQG negotiations so that we can establish a transformational financial goal at COP29. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Canada. Thank you both for these positive indications on progress on this very important issue. Regarding sub-item 8B, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance, the COP is invited to consider the report of the SCF and consider the recommendations of the SPI on the second review of the functions of the SCF and take any action it deems appropriate. I thank the co-chairs of the SCF, Gertrud Wolonsky from Austria and Zahir Fakr from South Africa for their leadership and work this year. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Apollonia Mayola from Italy and Ali Waqas from Pakistan for consideration of matters under this sub-item. Regarding sub-item 8C, report of the Green Climate Fund to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Green Climate Fund, the COP is invited to provide guidance to the GCF on policies, program priorities, and eligibility criteria taking into consideration the reports of the GCF and the SCF. I thank Noman Bashir Bahati from Pakistan and Victoria Gunderson from the United States of America for their leadership as co-chairs of the GCF board and the members of the board for their hard work. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Marine Lanoy from France and Richard Mayongi from Tanzania for consideration of matters under this sub-item. For sub-item 8D, report of the Global Environment Facility to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Global Environment Facility, the COP is invited to provide guidance to the GEF on policies, program priorities and eligibility criteria, taking into consideration reports of the GEF and the SCF. I thank the chairperson of the GEF, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, and the GEF Secretariat for their work undertaken by the GEF. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Ms. Lanoy and Mr. Mayongi for consideration of matters under this sub-item. For sub-item 8E, seventh review of the financial mechanism, the COP is invited to agree on the guidelines for the seventh review of the financial mechanism, taking into account the guidelines contained in the Annex to Decision 12/CP.22. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Ricardo Marshall from Barbados and Solomon Schoenfield from the United Kingdom for consideration of matters under this sub-item. For sub-item 8F, compilation and synthesis of and summary report on the in-session workshop on biennial communications of information related to Article 9, Paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement, the COP is invited to consider the compilation and synthesis of the second biennial communications of developed country parties and summary report of the second biennial in-session workshop and information to be provided by parties. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Elena Pereira from Honduras and Kelly Sharp from Canada for consideration of the matter under this subcommittee. Under sub-item 8G, operationalization of the funding arrangements responding to loss and damage referred to in paragraph 2, including the fund referred in paragraph 3 of decisions 2/CP.27 and 2/CMA.4. I propose to take this agenda sub-item later during the session once we have launched all other work under the COP, CMP and CMA. May I take it that the COP agrees to the organization of work proposed under agenda item 8, matters relating to finance as just proposed. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I would like to thank the co-chairs for accepting this role. To accelerate our work, I request the co-chairs of the contact groups established under sub-items 8A to F to produce draft decision texts after the first meeting of the respective contact groups. I invite parties to refer to the daily program and CCTV for information on the time and location of the first meeting of the contact groups. I invite the COP to turn to agenda item 16, sub-item B, decision-making in the UNFCCC process. At COP27, parties were unable to conclude their consideration of this matter, and in accordance with Rules 10C and 16 of the draft Rules of Procedure being applied, this matter has been included in the provisional agenda for COP28. I propose that Omar Lebreki, a senior member of my delegation, undertake informal consultations on sub-item 16B, and I will report on the consultations at the closing plenary. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to agenda item 3, report of the subsidiary bodies, sub-item A, report of the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice. I invite the co-facilitators of the 2023 Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue convened at SBSTA 58 to present the findings of the informal summary report. Nayal Odia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, it's my honor to be here as co-facilitator for the 2023 Ocean and Climate Dialogue alongside Mr. Julio Cordano of Chile. Those of us in this room today are all well aware of the urgent need for actions to mitigate and adapt to climate change, in many cases through our own personal experiences with the effects of climate change. The Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue, which took place over 2 days in conjunction with Substa 58, and focused on the topics of coastal ecosystem-based restoration, including blue carbon and aquatic foods, highlighted the need for us all to pay more attention to the critical role which a healthy ocean can play and must play in our collective efforts to address the climate crisis. We know that the ocean offers unique opportunities for holistic climate change adaptation and mitigation-based solutions, helping us to better cope with extreme weather events and sea level rise driven by climate change, as well as serving as a key global carbon sink. However, we also know that climate change is already adversely affecting the ocean, threatening its ability to regulate the Earth's climate. We are at a tipping point. A key message that came out of this year's dialogue was the importance of strengthening ocean-focused research and data management, bridging knowledge gaps, and promoting standardized data sharing to effectively integrate the ocean into climate commitments, including the NDCs. With increased knowledge, we will be better equipped to identify where protection and restoration efforts will contribute to strengthening the ocean's ability to capture and store carbon. Not only does the ocean offer enormous potential for holistic climate change mitigation and adaptation measures, but it is also a vital source of nutrition for the world. The outcomes of the dialogue highlight the importance of sustainable aquatic foods to the global carbon cycle, as well as the significant positive potential of the ocean to achieve just transition to renewable sources of energy and low-carbon food security. This year's dialogue has called for the integration of aquatic food climate solutions within national processes, including into the UNFCCC process, by adopting a systems-based approach and linking national climate policies with blue food production. The lessons learned from the dialogue emphasize that our globally shared ocean presents vital opportunities for taking ambitious climate action, and that we must act now. I would now like to give the floor to my co-facilitator, Mr. Cordano, to say a few words on moving this work forward.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, parties to the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement have recognized the importance of conservation, enhancement and protection of the ocean to address the climate crisis. This year's dialogue was aimed at strengthening ocean-based climate action at national level and under the UNFCCC process. Over 250 positive solutions were shared by parties and observers at the dialogue. We showed the wealth of existing options and the importance of the ocean in the global fight against climate change. Through the dialogue, we learn about real-world examples of collaboration with indigenous peoples, local communities, vulnerable groups, youth, women, and the private sector that can address policy barriers, facilitate investments, and promote effective conservation efforts. The dialogue report calls on parties to continue integrating ocean-based climate solutions into national climate policies and strategies, including into NDCs and NAPs. The report also further stresses the importance of increasing, scaling up, and ensuring stable and accessible finance flows for the implementation of sustainable fishing practices and management and restoration of coastal ecosystems, and to strengthen the resources of the Secretariat to follow up on the parties' policies and practices in this regard. A key message that emerged from the Ocean Dialogue was strengthening institutional linkages between partners at national and international levels and across the UN mandates and processes, including the recent BBNJ Treaty and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to enhance global ambition and action for a climate-resilient ocean. The Paris Agreement emphasizes that the global stocktake should inform parties in enhancing their climate actions and international cooperation. In this line, a key message from the dialogue is that the GST outcomes considers guidelines for parties to be able to strengthen ocean-based measures in their updated NDCs and national strategies. It is our view that the ocean holds one of the keys to an equitable and sustainable planet, and this should be reflected in the outcomes of this important meeting. We remain available to parties, Niall and I, as co-facilitators of this dialogue, to parties and observers to continue engaging on the outcomes of the Ocean Dialogue. And for this, we will convene an informal and open meeting that is scheduled on the 3rd of December at 1 p.m. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Julio and Niall. We will return to Agenda Item 3 once the work of the subsidiary bodies has concluded. Delegates, this brings us to the end of the first meeting of the COP. We will meet later today for the joint plenary of the governing and subsidiary bodies to hear statements from groups of parties and observers after the opening plenaries of the subsidiary bodies. We will resume this meeting of the COP after the CMA opening plenary to consider COP Agenda Sub-Item 8G, operationalization of the funding arrangements for responding to loss and damage referred to in paragraph 2, including the fund referred to in paragraph 3 of decisions 2/CP.27 and 2/CMA.4. This meeting of the COP is suspended. Distinguished delegates, I now declare open the 18th session of the Conference of Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. We will now proceed with our work under Agenda Item 2, Organizational Matters. I invite the Conference to consider Sub-Item 2A of the Provisional Agenda, Adoption of the Agenda. I invite parties to turn to documents FCCC/CMP/2023/1 and Addenda 1 and